first keynote session for the day, I would like to invite on stage Mr. Philip Chua, Group Senior Technology Counsel at AIA. Thank you very much.
Again, very good morning. And certainly a privilege to be the first speaker to kick off the second day. So whether the day goes well or not, I guess depends on me, right? So I was, as you've heard, right, I'm the Group Technology Counsel of AIA. So that means I support all of the technology initiatives from a legal and regulatory perspective across AIA in all of our operations in our 18 market units in Asia Pacific. When I was asked to, give a talk, and I know this is a short period of time, I was wondering what can I share with you in a short span of time that is meaningful, right? So I thought maybe what I can do is walk you through very quickly, right, some of our digital transformation journey, right? I know digital transformation is a very much often used word, right? And it's been around for quite a number of years, right? But what we believe we are doing at AIA is truly unprecedented for a scale of our size within our own industry, right? So with that in mind, what I want to do is maybe walk you through a few items, right? So one, let me take you a little bit through who we are, right, in the region. Secondly, what is actually our digital transformation initiative and why we are doing it. And then thirdly is to glean some learnings that we have encountered across the last 2 years in dealing both with regulators as well as with our partner vendors, right, as we have embarked on our journey, right? In this day and age, we also recognize we cannot do everything, right? We don't have all the skill sets in this fast-changing technology world. We need partners to come alongside us and help us along our journey. But we also need partners to understand, right, the direction we are taking, some of the principles that we are using, and we want them to align with us in this regard. So I can share with you some of the challenges we've had, right, some of which are a battle at times, right, and then some of which have been successful, right? So let me start with who we are. So AIA is a life insurance company. So we are a pan-Asian company. We only operate across Asia Pacific in 18 market units, right? We are not in Europe, neither are we in the US, right? We have a market cap of about maybe close to $130 billion. At present, we have approximately about 38 million policy holders across the region and about 16 million customers from corporate entities, right, who have signed up to our policies. So a couple of years ago, we decided that we wanted to pivot our purpose and our direction, right? So we were known more for an insurance payer, right? So we pay out insurance claims, and to date we paid out over $2 trillion of insurance claims. But we wanted to be known for more than that. So we changed our purpose. We wanted to be a trusted health life advisor to our policyholders with one specific aim, which is to help our policyholders live longer, healthier, better lives. Which means that we needed to go out and engage with our customers like we have never done before, right? And the way we go to market, right, as an insurance companies, we have our own agency force, right, which is primarily has always been the way we've gone to market. But we've also in the past, in the more recent years, ramped up our partnerships with the banks, right? And in this modern day of digitalization, right, we have looked into establishing digital partnerships with the likes of Gojek, for example, in Indonesia, right? So there's been a lot of cooperation and partnership in this manner. And that requires a change in which how we engage with them and how we build our technology to interoperate with these partners. So I want to share with you, this is a slide that we presented at our Analyst Day, right? And this was from our recent 2021 results that we presented in, I believe, around March or April of this year, right? And what I want to highlight here, I know it's quite a busy slide, right? But what I want to highlight here is essentially 2 points, right? One, in order to reach out to the customer and engage to the customer, right, in the way that we wanted to, we needed to upgrade the technology that we had. So as you can imagine, we were operating in 18 market units. Each market unit had its own infrastructure, right? So it's pretty much siloed. So what we wanted to do was to move to the cloud, right? That was our first initiative, right? So we consider ourselves today a cloud-first organization. So as it stands, we are on target to move about 80% of our workloads into the cloud. And this is not a it's not an on-prem private cloud that we run. We made the strategic decision to partner with one of the global hyperscalers, right? And we moved all our workloads into that hyperscaler, right? Because that gives us economies of scale, it gives us efficiencies, it gives us scalability to reach out, to develop programs and to reach out to customers and to work with partners the way that we felt needed to in order to reach our ambition. And why we are doing all of this, and that's the second reason, is to take advantage of the technology that is in place to develop better insights. So we are not doing this just for, a lot of times people talk about you move to the cloud, you get unlimited compute power, you bring down your costs, you become more efficient. Yes, you get all of that, but that only brings you up to a certain point and then you hit a wall, right? Then you can't do anything beyond that. But where the value really comes in is what do you do with all that data that sits in the cloud? And how do you then utilize that data to drive the insights that you want? Because in order to be that health advisor, in order to advise our customers how to live healthier, longer, better lives, we need to be able to to interact with our clients seamlessly, to give them personalized insights, to customize a program and a policy for their needs at that time, for that particular age group, demographic, or geography. So when we did all of this, this was the end goal that we had in mind. How do we then use the data to drive big data analytics? And how do we use this data to then drive AI-led initiatives that gives us better insights in engaging with our policyholders? So when we started this journey 2 years ago, this was the high-level roadmap that we had set up. And as I mentioned, we are 80% on the cloud. We've already launched, I think, over 100 data analytics initiatives. And we have in the progress now of launching our artificial intelligence-led programs as well. And while all of this, when we are in the cloud, it gives us the ability to then interoperate more seamlessly with our bank assurance partners, as well as those partnerships of I would say the unicorn companies that we are working with today to reach their client base. Like for example, as I mentioned, the likes of Gojek as well, who are also at the forefront of this type of initiative, technology initiative. So I hope this at least gives you a high-level view of the direction we are taking across our business and within this region, right? And then we recently launched our 1 billion initiative, right, on the back of this. And that initiative, what we hope to achieve is that by the year 2030, we want to touch 1 billion lives, right? And you cannot do that on technology that is yesterday, right? You have to move into the technology of today and then be able to use the tools that exist within the technology to reach out to those policyholders and potential customers as well. So that's who we are. That's where our journey is at present. So then I want to share with you some of the learnings, right? Because it's been a 2-year journey so far. We give ourselves 3 years to get to where we wanted to. So it's been 2 years into that 3-year journey, right? And I wanted to set out some learnings and some challenges that we've had and how we've approached them with regulators as well as with vendors, right? So what I want to say here before I start this, there is a third component to this which I've not listed, which is internal stakeholder management, right? As the role of legal counsel, we play a significant, I would say we are the glue between our internal teams as well as the external world, right? And also we are the glue between our internal teams, right? Because most times when we work with technology, with the technology IT teams, right, they think very much in engineering terms. We have to decipher those engineering terms and turn it into a form that they understand, right? So that we can articulate not only to senior management who are not so technology literate, but who want to see outcomes, as well as to external regulators, and to explain to vendors as well, right? How to translate all that complicated architectural diagrams into real words, right? That means something on a piece of paper, right? But that's a whole other topic, which I don't intend to cover today, but I thought I'd just call that out. So I want to touch a little bit on regulators first. So in terms of regulators, as I mentioned, we are across 18 market units. So we have to deal with 18 regulators, right? So, but one thing good I would say about what I've observed across all our regulators in Asia Pacific, the regulators are actually quite encouraging in terms of adoption of cloud technology, right? As well as in data transfer, right? I think it's because the regulators themselves understand that the power of that technology is only useful if you can aggregate data and you can consolidate it, right, and centralize it. So in that regard, the regulators themselves, right, have not really been a hindrance or an obstacle, right? But of course, each regulator in each of our market units have slightly different concerns. As you know, I mean, in Asia, we are not a homogeneous environment, unlike in the US or in Europe to a large extent. We don't have one set of universal laws, right, that govern stuff like this, right? But I think from what I've noticed, there are a few things that regulators, no matter which country they sit in, have a common concern, right? So the first is around termination. So this caught me a little bit by surprise initially, because when you go to regulators and you apply for permission, right, to move your data into the cloud, and especially if the cloud doesn't sit in your home country, right? I did not expect regulators to actually go into details in terms of the contract structure that you have with your providers, right? Whether it be the hyperscalers or the SaaS providers, as an example. So one of the things they actually ask and they focus on is, what are your termination rights, right? Because, things change, right? Things evolve. And there may be instances where regulators themselves feel that a certain area of processing or a certain activity should not be offshore, but should be brought back onshore at some point in time. So they, in that regard, they want to ensure that as the client, we negotiate and we work collaboratively with our vendors, right, to ensure that there is this termination right, there is this transition exit plan that enables us to do that, right? So there is a knock-on effect, of course, in that discussion with the vendor, which I will cover a little bit in a few minutes. Secondly, it's around audits, right? So initially, when the question of audits came up with regulators, right, it was quite onerous, I will say, right? Because, I think in the initial days, regulators think of whether it's cloud or it's a traditional data center, there is this ability to enter the data center and do an inspection, right? To look at how you run your operations, how you set up your infrastructure, how you maintain your physical security, right? So I think they had this notion at the beginning. But over time, right, what we have discovered with regulators in our discussions with them is that some, especially the hyperscalers, right, there's no way you can do that, right? Even as a client, we can't go into a hyperscaler data center and do any audits or any inspection, right? So the audit rights that we have now negotiated with regulators that we have then built into our vendor contracts is at the very least the ability to enter into the vendor environment, the vendor office, have a look at their books, have a look at the documentation, and then have a look at how they run their operations. At least from a paper walkthrough, right? There is this structure that has in place, that is put in place, that satisfies the regulator's concern, right? So in this regard, so far we have found that if we approach it in this way, most regulators in the region tend to be amenable to this approach, as opposed to the earlier days, right, where they are looking for physical access into a data center. Of course, access and security is a key concern, especially if you read the newspaper in Singapore a couple of days ago, right? There's been, one of our local hospitals was fined for a data breach, right, which they did not detect over 2 years, right? And in the recent months, large brand name companies, right, have also been subject to data breaches as well. So, when we talk with regulators, one of the things that they would want to see is how you manage breaches of this nature. What is your incident management response plan? Right? Most regulators don't necessarily dictate a particular standard of security protocols. They don't. But what they want to see is how you react and how you respond to an incident. So there's a session later on, a panel discussion, where I think this will be covered in more detail. So I'll leave it for that panel to go into more of the specifics on that. Then, of course, data residency, transfers, and evolving legislation. So nothing is ever static. So as I mentioned, data transfer, most times, most regulators are quite open to the idea of that data leaving home country. However, things are never, as I said, never static, right? Things are always evolving. And the ability to change while that evolution happens. So in this regard, while we deal with the regulators on these issues, I think internally what we had to do within AIA is how do we monitor changes, right? So normally it doesn't happen overnight, right? So regulators will give you a fairly long lead time, sometimes up to a year, that they are looking at certain changes in the way data is to be handled, right? So the ability to monitor, to get ahead of the curve, and the ability to then give input and influence direction is important. And this is one of the things that we are trying to do across all our 18 market units. So if you look recently in the last 12 months, right, there was huge change in China, right, in terms of how data is to be transferred, how data is to be handled. And that, then on our end, we've had to respond to that. Right? We had to look at how our current processes are, how we are processing data outside of China at present, and whether that will change or not. Even in Vietnam, right, in this year alone, right, there is a legislation that has been passed that mandates a copy of that data now must reside in Vietnam. So for us in Vietnam, everything was offshore into one of the hyperscalers instances. So we now have to go back, relook at that architecture, bring back a copy of that data onshore, work with a vendor to establish that, right, and then to maintain that in Vietnam itself. So these are two of the examples of what has happened in the last 12, 15 months in the region and what we needed to do to respond. And finally, the responsible use of data. So as I mentioned, all this means nothing if you don't use the data. Right? So regulators are also keen as to how we are using the data, especially when it comes to data analytics, AI projects, right? And that requires us to then set up a process where we can monitor and the risk of using the data in AI projects. And at the same time, we also have to understand what it means to the individual. And therefore, we have to then come up with a mechanism that gives the individual the right to address and redress any decision that we have taken as a result of the algorithm that affects that individual. And then, of course, the collection, the use, the storage, the retrieval of that data, right, needs to be aligned with data privacy and protection principles as well, right? So these are the things that I find quite common across regulators in the region as we engage them, right? These are the more common ones that we address. And generally, so far, as I mentioned, regulators are quite open in this regard. Then it comes to the vendor. So whatever we do with the regulator then has a flow-on effect to the vendor. And one of the biggest things that has happened in this year is capacity, right? So, even the hyperscaler that we work with, right, highlighted to us a capacity issue, right? And we know that as I mentioned, we are a cloud-first company. What that means is that we only look to vendors first who are on the cloud, who provide their offering and services from the cloud. And they, on their end, also contract very likely with one of these hyperscalers as well. Or if not, they run their own version of what is a private cloud, right? So in the old days, right, when cloud first was initiated, we always thought there was unlimited capacity, right? That was the unique selling point of a cloud. We never thought about the fact that capacity would ever run out, right? Because they would surely know how to manage the volume and the demand and the supply side of things. But in this year, it caught us very much by surprise. I'm not ashamed to say this. Even we were caught by surprise when we were told by some of our vendors that capacity was an issue, right? So what it meant was that we needed to pivot in how we engage with our vendor partners moving forward. So in the past, we never looked at capacity planning as part of an obligation with our vendors, right? But now we will have to, right? So within the contracts that we do with our vendors, we do put in a provision around capacity planning. Not so much as to dictate to the vendor how to plan your capacity, that's not our job, right? But it's for the vendor to share with us and give us a level of comfort that they have a capacity planning program in place and how they're managing their supply chain, right? Because, before, when you used to order a server, it took, 6-8 weeks before it got delivered, right? Today, I can tell you that with one of our vendors, they quoted us a 6-month lead time, which is 3 times longer, and the business can't wait for 6 months, right? So in part of our selection of a vendor and part of the contract negotiations with the vendor, we now look at this as a key component as well, right? Data privacy, right? So as I talked a little bit about that in earlier section with regulators, and this is a constant battle I have, right, with vendors, right? Especially those that are based out of the US or in Europe, right? Because at the very outset, vendors will come and say, hey, this is my data protection agreement, please sign up to it because it is good for you. So I know there's some vendors represented here, so maybe as a tip, if you deal with AIA, please never tell me it's good for me. I won't believe it. Because I've been on the vendor side before. When I tell a client it's good for you, it means it's good for me. But seriously, I mean, we are a regulated industry. We work through 18 market units. We have to satisfy 18 regulators, right? So we have a set of data privacy principles that we need to adhere to that are common, that we feel are important and common across all our market units, especially when we're looking to aggregate data, right? And we're moving data from multiple market units into that vendor environment to do whatever that vendor is meant to do for us, right? So, I always tell vendors, right, in this regard, why don't you start with looking at what we have in our contract, what is important for us, and instead of telling me I need to sign up to your data protection agreement, look at what I have, tell me what you can't comply, and we'll work from there, right? Because I doubt it if there's anything that we will ever ask that is against most norms, right? Most times, 99% of the time, a vendor will be able to comply, and it's already complying with those provisions, just that it's not couched in the way that you are used to, right? So that's one of the, it comes up every negotiation, and it normally takes 3-4 days to work through this in total. So that's 3-4 days that we can do without, actually. Then I talked about termination rights. So And in a cloud-first world, termination rights are a little bit different than in the old days, right? When if you license a piece of software on-premise, right? And I still find vendors today, right, when we talk about termination, they still think in those terms, right? So if you terminate, then you have to, and at the end of the day, it's a commercial discussion, right? If you terminate, pay me for the balance of what you owe me in the contract term, right? But in a cloud-first world, that's not how it works, right? Because the whole purpose of a cloud is that it is on demand, right? Because the vendor is serving a larger base, you can dynamically move volumes, you have a resource that is never dedicated, it's shared across a broad base of clients. So when it comes to termination, again, this is one of those items we debate quite vigorously with the vendor, right? And we never accept the fact that we will have to pay the balance of the remainder of the term if we had to terminate, right? For convenience, right? Not talking about breach, but for convenience, right? As a result of a regulatory mandate. So again, this is one of the things that, as part of the vendor negotiations, this is one of the most common items that we actually have to debate quite significantly with the vendor. And then finally, audit rights, right? So audit, not just from the regulatory standpoint I talked about, but also from a data breach, right? So most times, in all the contracts I've seen, it's not really evolved too much, right? You have an audit right once a year, probably, and then if there's an incident that happens, then you have an audit right to come in, right, to get the vendor to do remediation and all that. But actually, when you look at what is happening today, that is clearly insufficient, right? So from an AIA perspective, right, again, because we are so heavily regulated, right, and when a data breach happens, for example, in Singapore, not only do we have to respond to the MAS, we have to respond to the Data Privacy Commission as well, right? So we have multiple layers of accountability. So as part of that, audit rights, we normally ask vendors that, look, we do not just want the normal once a year audit rights and, if something happens, then you will then remediate and then we audit the remediation. No. What we normally do is that we ask them, in addition to all that, if an incident happens, right, we want to be involved in that remediation. We need to be involved. And then we need to be able to audit the progress of that remediation, not just once it happens. And then once it's remediated, we want to have the right to audit as well the continued enforcement of that remediation, right? And then every year, every anniversary, we want the ability, or we want the ability to audit the security protocols. Now, that may seem to be a bit onerous, right? So most times we tell vendors, we are prepared to rely on your certification. For example, most vendors will have a SOC Type 2 audit report, right? So which we are more than happy to rely on. But this is a reflection of how the regulators see security incidents and the need, right, for increased control, right, on us as the enterprise. So again, with the vendors, there's lots of things that we can talk about, but from an AIA perspective and what I normally talk to vendors, these are the 5 most important things, right? The rest I'm not too fussed about, but these are the ones that we actually really, really focused on because it has a direct impact to the business, to our reputation, right, and to our ambition as well. So, in conclusion, what I wanted to leave you with is that, when we talk about transformation, most enterprises I know are a little bit slow to look at transformation on a global scale or an enterprise-wide scale, especially in Asia, right? And some of them, sometimes, regulators are used as the reason. But I want to just leave you, if there's anything, leave you with the message that actually regulators are quite collaborative. It takes time and investment, an investment of time and patience with the regulators, right? So some will take months, right, which is pretty fast, but we have regulators that actually took a year to give us approval, right? So, but it is encouraging, right? And it's actually, it's not an obstacle that cannot be overcome. So take heart, right? We are doing it, and I can tell you from first-hand experience, actually regulators are very, very collaborative. The only thing we need to fix is the vendor mindset. If we can fix that in AIA, it will be perfect, right? So with that, I want to thank you very much for your attention. I hope you took something away out of this. I'm around for a good part of the day. If there's anything anyone wants to maybe learn a little bit more, ask a little bit more questions, I'm here. Just feel free to approach me. Right? Thank you very much.